My name is Sean Burke. I'm the product unit manager for the controls team at Microsoft. And today we're going to spend some time talking about Silverlight controls and the roadmap we have for control development going forward. So first I'm going to talk about a little bit about my team. Scott, yesterday in his keynote, mentioned the Silverlight toolkit, which is the project my team has been working on. We're developing software in a slightly different model than a lot of the teams are at Microsoft, so we're going to spend a few minutes talking about that and how that's going to impact the roadmap going forward. Then we'll take a quick lap through the controls that we released yesterday for PDC in the Silverlight toolkit, how to use those controls, some basic scenarios, how to have some fun with them. Talk about the styling, and then we'll start looking at future plans about where we hope to go in the controls story in the future. So back in, over the past few years, my team has run a project called the Ajax Control Toolkit. And the Ajax Control Toolkit was an open source project developed to focus on building components for Ajax. It was fully open source. It was under what's called a Microsoft public license, which is a very permissive license, allows you to do what you want with the code. And we actually took takebacks from the community into the code base as well. The Ajax toolkit was very, very successful. And in April, Scott Guthrie came to me and said, hey, I'd like you to kind of really re-inject some energy into the control space for Silverlight and WPF, so here's some funding and go build a team. So I've been building a team to do this, and we've been focusing on Silverlight for the past few months, and the Silverlight toolkit is our first offering. We will be doing WPF controls as well. So our goal is to ship controls frequently, be responsive to the community's needs, keep an eye at what's going on out in the industry, and kind of just really turn the crank and get controls out there. Some of the philosophies that we use, we ship with source code for our controls. You can rebuild that code, you can fix it, you can put it in your application, you can do, frankly, whatever you want with it. We also ship unit tests, a unit test harness for Silverlight and samples in the project, and I'll show you more about that in a minute. And then over time, as controls become more popular and more used by the community, we'll deliver them into the platform if it's the appropriate thing to do. And that platform could be the core runtime in Silverlight, or it could be the .NET framework, depending on if it's WPF or Silverlight. So here's how our delivery model basically works. Up in the left-hand corner there, we have new controls. My team is always writing new controls, and we're looking out in the community, taking ideas from folks, writing new controls. When they reach a certain level of quality, we go ahead and put them into the CodePlex project so users can start downloading them and play with them. Over time, we'll get feedback, we'll fix bugs, we'll improve the controls. And the way we do this, and we signify to the community what the quality level of control is something that we're calling quality bands. So when you ship software, you can do it in one of two ways. You can either take all of your components, and you can drive them to a quality level and ship as one big chunk, which is typically the way that it's done. Or you can actually say, well, here's my release vehicle, and what I'm going to do in there is I'm going to have components at differing quality levels over time based on what kind of level of risk or adventurousness the user wants to take. So we mark each of our components with the quality band that they're in. So right now, all of the components in the toolkit are in either the preview or the stable quality band. So here on the right, you see the 4 quality bands. Experimental. These are things that we might put in there just to see what people's feedback are, if it's a good idea, if it's going to work. But we actually may not go forward with it if the feedback, if we realize it's a scenario that we can't make work, or it's something else is wrong with it. When components move into the preview quality band, that means we're committed to that component. We're going to be moving it forward. And a preview component should meet basic scenarios. So if you think about a component like a hyperlink control, it doesn't do a lot of stuff. So even in the preview band, it's pretty useful for most folks. Preview controls may have some breaking changes between versions as we respond to feedback and make sure we get it right. But once we kind of slow that stuff down and the feedback becomes more on the bug fix level, we move things into the stable quality band. Stable quality band components should be good for 90% of scenarios. Maybe some corner cases aren't quite right yet, but they're basically useful for most folks. Stable is something that we consider pretty close to a beta quality. And then over time, components will move into what we call the mature quality band. Mature quality band components are full RTM quality, what you would expect. They'll have no breaking changes unless it's some sort of a security issue. So the idea is if you use just mature quality band components out of the toolkit, upgrading from one version to the next should be an absolute no-brainer for you. Just drop the DLL in and off you go. So at the bottom, what's going to happen is that the components that are immature will end up in the SDK or the tools release or in the runtime, whatever the appropriate spot is for them, so that they're part of the default experience. So that's how our team gets our components out to the broader developer base without having to have them go and keep an eye on CodePlex. So with that, since we released the toolkit yesterday, I wanted to give everyone a quick idea of what we released and how you can use it in your applications. So what we have here is our toolkit project. And if you go to CodePlex, you can download this project. You can get just the binaries. You can get binaries and samples, or you can get binary samples and source. And so what this is the full project here. And you see we have a couple of directories here in this project. There's the samples directory. There's the source. This is the source code for all of the components. Oh, sorry about that. Where'd it go? So for example, autocomplete box, all the source code used there. This is the default style, the XAML that the default style for autocomplete uses. And so everything is here that you need if you want to make fixes or make changes. If you take a look at one of these code files, we're trying to make things really kind of lightweight and easy for us to manage and very consumable by the community. And so we've used XML documentation, and we use this to generate a CHM help file for the build that people use. But all of the documentation is right here in line. I know there's a lot of stuff here. So each member is documented right in line. And you see here at the top we have a custom XML member which qualifies the quality band. And so when the components go out and the help file gets built, there's actually a thing right at the top of the help file for autocomplete box that says this is in the preview quality band. If you click on the word preview, it'll take you to the definition of preview. So try to make it really clear to folks which components are in which quality band. Another thing that we've shipped with the toolkit is our testing harness. So when we started writing Silverlight components, there was really not a good way to test them. And so I sat down with one of my developers and said, let's figure out a way to get a good testing harness built for Silverlight. So my developer, Jeff Wilcox, has been working on this Silverlight testing framework that he's released on his blog. But we use that internally for all of our testing as well. So what happens when you run one of these projects is that it'll actually just start kicking it off. So I'll go ahead and show you that. Hopefully it comes up on the right monitor. So here it is. So this is our unit test harness, and we have like 2,500 unit tests that'll run, and it happens so fast it doesn't actually render. But basically, this unit test harness is here. There's tons of examples for how to write your own unit tests in your Silverlight application. You can use this harness for your apps. It's got a bunch of facilities around how to filter which tests run, how to generate log files back to the server. So it's very useful, and something we're shipping is a value add you get. So you get more than just controls with the toolkit. And then finally, what we ship in here is this large sample site that has an absolute ton of samples for you to use. So let's go ahead and run that. And this is we've actually taken this exact same site, and this is hosted up on Silverlight.net. So what this is a live demo of all of the components. And we'll get into some specific components. But basically, as you click through this, it gives you a bunch of examples of how to use it. And then at the top up here, you get the XAML that was used to create that page. And then you get the CS file. So for folks that want to learn about how to use our components or how to write Silverlight components in general, this is up on the web. It's also in the project, so you can kind of consume it and chop it up and use it as examples and do whatever you like. So we'll come back to this a little bit more later. So let's talk about the components that we actually shipped yesterday, or released yesterday. I guess we didn't really ship them. So the first chunk of things we've been working on, there's a spelling error, PDC controls. Sorry about that. The first set of controls that we worked on, we want to make sure that there's some folks that are coming from WPF that are used to certain facilities being in their projects. And things like dock panel and wrap panel and tree view are components that WPF developers are really used to having. So those are the first controls that we went off and did. I mentioned that some controls will make their way into the runtime, and I think some of these are probably good candidates for that. Dock panel, wrap panel, tree view, expander, label, view box, headed content control, and headed items control. These are controls, again, that are present in WPF. So one of the things that's really important to us is to make sure that there's the best possible compatibility between Silverlight and WPF. So for these components that are part of the WPF PDC control bucket, we did everything we can to make them exactly API compatible with the WPF version. So if you're used to those, that's what you get. And so it was actually it was difficult for us because there's sometimes we wanted to do things a little different or kind of innovate a little bit, things that we thought were better for the Silverlight platform, but we held pretty tightly to the WPF bar, so you'd be able to go back and forth easily with your code and your templates and stuff like that. So we'll talk about a couple of these just to give you a flavor for the kind of components that's in there. The first component is called dock panel. And the way that dock panel works is basically it's a container control. And for each child in the container, you tell it where you want it to dock. And it will keep that component docked to that side. When the resize happens, it does the relayout and stuff like that. So for example, I could have 3 children here, a left, a top, and a right, and the dock panel would arrange them in this way for me automatically. This last one, there's a last child fill property. If that's true, that right box, the purple one there, would fill the entire thing, so it would look like bottom. So that's kind of how dock panel works. And the code is very simple. So here's some here's an example of some code that you would use if you were using dock panel in your application. It's a container dock panel. You add some children to it. In this case, we're just adding a couple border controls with some well-chosen colors to show the example here. And you see this bolded controls dock panel .dock equals left. That's what's called an attached property. And this is kind of a fundamental concept in WPF and Silverlight. The idea that parents can surface properties down to their children. And so there's lots of examples of this. One example is that if you're used to Windows forms, all components have a left and a top property. Well, in WPF, because WPF manages layout, components don't have a left and a top property. What happens is that certain containers allow them to be moved around, and the container exposes the top and the left property. So if you have a button, its top and left property are actually attached by its container if you're using a canvas that allows you to move things around. So that's this idea of attached property. So what's happening here is that we have an attached property called dock that the dock panel container kind of pushes down to its children. And in this case, left, top, right, give me an idea of how that would lay out. So one thing to remember is that this is order dependent. So if we reversed the order here and we put right, top, left instead, we would get the controls laying out in the opposite order. So hopefully that makes sense. So when you start playing with this, just understand that if things aren't quite right, that you need to make sure you have them in the right order in the control, because the last one in gets the last spot. So dock panel. Another example of a basic control that we're shipping is an expander. An expander allows you to expand and collapse content in one of 4 directions. Very similar to like in Windows on the left, there's a little task pane there where you can open and close little sections of the task pane. Same idea here. Very simple control. It has 2 content properties, a header content, and then a kind of content property here. And for example, this tasks thing on the left is an expander control. So the top there, that little arrow, that's part of the control, and tasks, that's the header. And then do this, do that, do it all. Those are actions that are part of the content. So similarly, this is pretty easy to use. Controls expander. You can tell which direction you want it to expand. So depending on the direction you want it to expand, you get the arrow pointing in the right direction. In this case, it just takes some child content, a border control, and some hyperlinks. That's all there is to it. So you add that to your application, drop some content inside, and you're off and running. So tree view. We went out and tried to figure out which controls we should start with, and you always try and think of scenarios of which control is the most important and going to be the most asked for. And we kind of figured it would be expander, or it would be dock panel, actually, or one of these basic controls for like basic layout. It turns out that by 100,000 miles, tree view is the most requested component. And one of the reasons I thought that was kind of funny is because when I think about a lot of applications, it's not obvious there's always a tree view in them that you need, but I guess there is. So tree view, every single person, oh, when are you guys going to do a tree view? So we have a tree view. And the way this works is you just have a nested hierarchy of templatable nodes. And so for those of you that have been exposed to WPF or Silverlight data binding, the data binding syntax is extremely powerful, and we'll spend some time looking at it. But if you build your objects right, this just works. It's great. And so I was on the Windows Forms team for 8 years, and one thing we never had was a hierarchical data source. So people were always complaining they had to kind of build the tree view out by hand. This just works awesome. And so like in this case, we have a little bit of a different icon for each templated item. And so if you were to walk through your musical collection or something like that, that's what you would get. So I mentioned this syntax for data binding and how the hierarchy works. So what would happen here is if I had a tree view here and I wanted to actually have the tree view on the lower right, there's an example, generate this like hierarchy of classifications for species. I would connect the tree view to some data, and then you see here at the top there's this thing called a hierarchical data template. And that basically says it's going to output the item in the middle, the contents of this template as the contents for each item. And then it's going to look for a property on the object that it's walking called subclasses, and it's going to recurse. So it just becomes simply recursive. So I've got an object here that's got a property called subclasses, which returns essentially an array of more of its own type. And then it's also got a property called rank down here at the bottom. And so like rank is domain kingdom. And then finally, the text is classification, which is bacteria. I don't know how to say any of these other words. That's how it works. So that's how the data binding works. You have basically a tree of objects. So logically in your code, you have a tree of objects. And the data binding in Silverlight will walk that tree and create the tree for your tree view. So that's how that works. So it's simple. Once you kind of get the hang of it, it's incredibly powerful. Something I mentioned, I came from the Windows Forms world, and getting my head wrapped around how the data binding worked in WPF and Silverlight was, took a bit of a learning curve, but once you understand it, you can just do incredible stuff. So those are the controls that we're doing that are in WPF, but we wanted to make sure we added some innovation to the platform as well. So the new controls we have for PDC that are not in WPF are the autocomplete box, charting, and the numeric up-down. So some of these will be familiar to you. Some of them might be kind of new. One of the things that I've asked my team to do when we do any components is, a lot of components that people historically have used were written back in the Win32 days. And in Win32, for any of us that have written Win32 controls, is not terribly flexible in the kinds of things you can do. And if you want to be flexible, you've signed up for a lot of work, painting and managing hit testing and everything else. So with the power of the platforms in WPF and Silverlight, you can do a lot more. So I've really asked my team to kind of think broadly about scenarios and what these components can do. And I think we have some great ideas here that I'll show you in a second. So autocomplete. Autocomplete is what you would expect. You see it a lot of times in search boxes now on the internet, and we had one of these in the Ajax control toolkit as well. But this one is far and away superior to any of the other ones that we were able to find out there. So we went out and found all these examples. The level of customization you can do here is really quite interesting. So at the top, I can just hook this thing up to a list of names, or a list of strings, and it'll just work. I just say item source equals a list of strings, and I start typing, and it just works. So whether that list of strings comes from a static list or comes from a web service is up to the developer to decide, but it's very, very easy to wire up. You can also do templating. So for example, I don't want to have just text in there. I want to have a little picture. So there's a picture of my Vice President Soma down there, and as I type SO, I'll get a list of folks down there that I can template. Very easy to template, just like we templated the tree view control. And on the right, it's really, this is a neat example that I'll show you in a second, that you can kind of create IntelliSense. And the complexity of the control really scales well. We actually have functions in there like you can do lambda filters for how it shows its data, and you can kind of, as far as you want to go, the control will scale with you. So I'll show you examples of that in just a second. But here's how you would use it, in a simple case. Set the width of it, and then all you have to do is set the item source, and then the minimum prefix length, which is how many characters am I going to type before it starts auto-completing. And then in this case, if it was months, I type J and 1, and I get January, June, and July. Works great, very easy to use. If I want to go a little farther with this, I can do things like I can set whether or not it completes the entire word as I type or waits until I hit enter, or whether or not it allows me to do substring searching, for example, or whether or not it waits, only starts at the beginning. So it's super flexible just by setting properties. So next up, and this is kind of actually our big piece of the pie, so to speak, that we released, is charting. And so we've been working, it's a cross-company effort with some folks over in the SQL team that came from a company called Dundas, which has done controls for a long time. And so we got a lot of knowledge from them and a lot of help in making sure that we did it right. Because a lot of times things like charting, you're like, oh, I'm just going to go off and write charting, and you get about 2 months into it and you realize that you just went completely the wrong direction. So they've definitely helped us make good decisions about our architecture. And we really have focused on architecture. We've got some great demos I'm going to show you. But we wanted to make sure that we set ourselves up to be able to kick out lots of different kinds of charts and lots of good effects, and really leverage the power of the Silverlight platform, which is something that a lot of the other charting solutions out there don't do. So our charts are fully templatable. They take advantage of Visual State Manager, which is a new way of managing your control states. So the charting, I'm really happy with where charting has ended up. And one of the things that makes me happy is that I have absolutely no design skills at all, and I was able to create this little template. So that was a fun exercise last week. Lots of XAML. How does charting work? This isn't as bad as it looks. So one of the problems is that we have to, because of the way that the XML works, we have to have these prefixes and everything. It makes everything look a lot bigger. So I'm going to bind my chart to a set of assets. Probably not the best thing to be doing lately, but we've got some stock spawn and cache. I probably should have put pocket lint up there or something else that has value. But so object collection, 3 assets. An asset is just an object with a string property called type and an int property called value. And then I declare the chart down here. So charting : chart. I don't know why I'm pointing at this screen. You guys can't see me. Chart.series. And then this is how you define what kind of chart it is. It's this idea of a series. So if you wanted a chart with like bars and lines, you would add 2 series. You'd add a line series and you'd add a column series. And so you get bars and lines. You can create a chart with a pie and bars, but it's really bizarre, but you can do it. And so each series is then bound to its own data. So item source equals static resource basic values. That's basically, sorry, that should be asset values. That's binding up to the static resource that we declared up above in the XAML. And of course, you can do this in code as well. And then the dependent value binding is basically the x-axis. Like this is the category, I'm sorry, the independent value binding is the x-axis. So type in this case would be stocks, bonds, or cash. And then the dependent value binding is the value. So that's all there is to it. Call it portfolio, title, and then we're done. So down here at the bottom, I have another one of these, which is the exact same data, but is in a pie chart. So notice down here, the only difference is at the bottom that it says pie series instead of column series. That's it. So that's all it takes to wire up your chart. And so I'm actually getting excited to demo. Good, nice, OK. Let's see here. So I mentioned that we have this sample site. So we'll start there with the autocomplete. Where's my cursor? So let's see here. So the basic scenario is the autocomplete box. Like I mentioned, you can do really basic stuff like, I'm not even sure where these names came from. So you see the text automatically completes right there as I type. And this one doesn't until I actually select a value. So basic idea is there. We'll go down to scenarios because there's some really cool ones down here. So for example, I want to make sure that templating really works well so you can do really interesting stuff. Like whoever thought of having a data grid as your drop-down format? So in this case, we're able to bind the data to the data grid as we type. So you get this really, just really interesting, rich master details experience without having to futz around with a bunch of buttons. So it's great. I mentioned that, let's see, which one was it? Styling. I mentioned we've got this kind of crazy online reflection experience here. So I can type button and see it finds everything that's in the domain with button in it, and then I select one of those things. And then as I start typing down here, I'm like, I wonder if button has a property called is enabled. Oh, look, it does. Yeah. And it's not public, or it is public. I'm not sure why it's gray. So it's gray. But it's got these nice little icons next to it. I've also got an is enabled change property. So that's just a little bit of code. Like I said, you can check out the code here. And it's not a ton of XAML. Most of it's formatting and for the text and stuff like that. But the code is here. All the subclasses that you need, or like kind of not subclasses, but utility classes. What else? This allows you to do filtering. So basically what's going on here is, this is a custom data template. Just shows you the flexibility there, so you get the general idea. I mentioned doc panel. There's just a ton of examples here of different sorts of docs. So if you're like, I wonder how I could create a crazy mosaic pattern, then we have that example for you with code. Let's see what else. Tree view, showed you the tree view examples. Oops. So tree view scenarios, master detail. But it has selection events as well, so you get this nice binding. So all this is written in just a tiny bit of code. So let's talk about, let's do charts though. Let's see, where is the chart? Oops. 1 second here. I had to reboot my computer to get the screen to work, and now I've lost track of where everything is. OK. Sorry about this. PCO8. All right, chart builder. OK. This is going to be worth it. Just a little pause. OK, here we go. So this is called Chart Builder. And basically, I love it when this is the reason why I get so geeked about software development. When you work with engineers, they just do crazy stuff that ends up being really cool. So David Anson is my developer who did most of, was kind of the heavy lifter on the charting project. And he got tired of creating chart samples, so he wrote this chart builder like for testing. So this is his testing thing. And so this thing is just uber cool. So what happens is that as I add more data points, you actually see the animation of the new ones showing up. And I can select what the starting value is, so I get negative values there. I can randomize the values, and just all kind of crazy stuff happens. So this animation and this dynamic attributes of the chart are something that's really fairly unique. Not a lot of the other charting solutions out there do this. And so there's a class called observable collection. And if your data is an observable collection, the chart just does this. There is no code in this sample that makes this happen. It just happens by magic. And so let's see. We can do a pie series. And when I was playing with this, I got myself into trouble, so hopefully nothing bad happens. So let's see, randomized value. So you get the idea here. I can go make this into a line series. And I'm going to be totally honest, I'm actually not sure why they're all in a straight line, why the data keeps coming out that way, but there's a line. So again, charting, very flexible, allows you to do a bunch of stuff. I'll show you one more quick thing with charting. I wanted to have folks make sure they were writing a lot of demos, sample apps coming up to this conference so that we found as many bugs as we could. So I have a new developer that just joined the team, and I said, hey, why don't you write a charting sample, and I'll show you what he came up with here. In the right project. I am. Okay, good. So this is actually pretty cool. So I wanted him to kind of show what happens when you actually look at a more realistic data set. And so he created this Contoso application here. And what I can do with this is I can actually start adding stocks to it. And it's actually fake stock data, so don't freak out. Hang on. There we go. So he just wanted to kind of play with some of the templating. We've got two different charts here, and we've got this kind of zooming idea here where you can zoom the chart, and it actually dynamically changes the amount of data that it's showing. Hang on. And allows you to scroll back and forth. So this is kind of a fun little thing. You can go. Now it's all right. Now it's fighting with me. So IBM, again, fake data, so nobody freak out. And then we have some neat templating things here where, come on. Where you can show how you can show data points and do data labels and stuff like that. So that's kind of a fun project. But again, with the sample site that I showed you earlier, definitely go and play around with this when you get a chance to, and we'll come back to this in a bit. All right. I'm not going to do this yet. I'm going to do another demo. So I do want to show how you can compose an application to kind of use these controls in an interesting way. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to build, and I'll go ahead and run where it's at now so you get an idea of what I'm talking about. I'm going to build a little calendaring application. And basically the way that this ends up working is I have two text boxes here, or two list boxes. I want to show you the end product, and we'll go back and show you how to build it. And notice it's styled, and it's got a calendar and stuff like that. So I want to show you how easy it is to build something like this. Here. So we're going to start with a blank project. And the first idea that I want to show you about here is this. I created this fake schedule managing thing. And it's just a silly class that has a bunch of observable collections hanging off it. And I mentioned observable collections. It's a generic type. If you're familiar with generics, it just allows you strong typing on there. And what this says is that when this collection changes, anybody who's hooked up to it will know that it changed, and they'll automatically respond to the data. So what this has, I'm just going to show it to you in this window here, is that this has a couple of properties. One's called schedule, one's called appointments, one's called end date. So remember these. We'll be hooking up to these later. And then, because I really love technology, I did my schedule as a flat text file. And it's a mock schedule that I created yesterday. So this is the data we're going to be building off of. Now the UI that we're going to start out with is pretty simple. So we'll go ahead and show that. Oops, show it right in Visual Studio. Slowly. So this is still theme. So let's go ahead and remove the theme here. Shoot, you know what I did? This is the completed one. One second. I don't know how I managed to get myself so befuddled on this, but I'll try one more time. Okay, so hopefully I didn't accidentally copy over the finished one with the basic one with the unfinished one. Oh shoot, and it looks like I did. So we're going to walk through the code. How about that? Wow, that's a big mix-up. So let's start taking a look at this thing piece by piece, and let's actually we'll go ahead and run it again. I'll show you how it works. So one thing you'll notice that it's styled, and we're going to talk about styling in a second. So go ahead and ignore that, but it is styled, and we did add some functionality. Scott didn't really mention this, but in the demo yesterday, but styling is something that we've added to the toolkit. So this application, essentially, you see I have 3 list boxes here, and each list box is actually a 2-dimensional list box. This is kind of weird. See, as I scroll here, I get list boxes this direction. As I scroll up here, I get list boxes this direction. I also get my appointments here in the calendar. So you actually get a pretty nice effect of them all being together because they're all grouped together. I'll show you that in a second. But each of these has an expander in them. So let's dig into how we built this application. Just going to go straight to full screen code view here. And we want just SAML. So a couple of interesting pieces about this application. One is that if you notice at the top there, we had to show dates. And one of the things that's frustrating for people about working with certain data types in Silverlight is that they'll just come out in the 2-string. So there's this idea of converters. And so I'll show you what happens if we don't have a converter in place here. At the very top, where is it at? So you see right here, there's this text block. And this is defining my list boxes that are horizontal. Here's the list box here. So I have a grid, and its height is 500, and this is the top level list box item. So this is basically these are going to be the items, the list boxes that are horizontal across the screen. So what I'm doing is I'm binding to the property of the data context. Remember, I had that appointment manager object, and it's got a property called schedule. So I set that as my item source. And then, so what happens is that when the Silverlight runtime loads, it's going to reach into that schedule property and start pulling out objects. And it's going to start data binding them to children. So that schedule had in it a couple of days of data. You saw when I selected on the calendar that I got a couple different days of data. And then, so you're going to get a list box for each day of data. So October 27th, October 28th, October 30th. We'll go ahead and show that. So at the top here, I've got days. So these are my 3 main list boxes here. And then inside of each of these, we have another list box. So the way we get them to go horizontally is we actually change the items panel template of the list box. What this does is it changes the kind of parent container that the list box is going to use. So normally list boxes would do things vertically, but by changing this to a stack panel, it's going to stack things horizontally. So that's how we change that. So we get 3 list boxes that go horizontal. Now the next thing that we're going to do is we want those list boxes that go vertical. And so we want to, for each day in the appointment calendar, we want to walk through each hour and go ahead and display one of those. So we'll clap some more stuff here. And that's this. So this is the list box that's going to go vertically. So we're going to bind to the appointment. So inside of the schedule object, there's a property called appointments, and there's a property called date. And so we're going to bind to each of those objects here. And so what I mentioned about converters is that we want to make sure that date comes out nicely. So if we don't have a converter on here, I'll show you what that ends up looking like. So notice we get this 10/28/2008, this up here at the top. And so that's not the format we want. So what we need to do to convert that format, in WPF, there's this idea of I-value converters, and they allow you to convert any data, any values going in to any value going out. So it gives you this way to get in the middle, and that's the way we're going to do here. So So this is the date here, and then we add the converter back here. And what this converter actually allows me to do is pass in a parameter. Oops. And so we go ahead and pass in the date format we want. This is just regular .NET formatting for dates. And then, so basically the way that this ends up working is that it's very simple. Every time the value is going to be rendered, this calls into my value converter and passes me a parameter. And so the code is just here. I take the date time value, I add a parameter to it, or I format it with a 2-string with a parameter, and that's it. So that allows me to do that. And then digging in more to where the controls are at is inside this list box here. So we open this list box template up. And you'll see down here, we're kind of getting to the meat of this thing. Basically, for each of these appointments, I want to basically just make an expander. And so what's going to happen here is that I'm just going to bind the title property. Each appointment has a title. Go to the PDC 35 talk and watch Sean muddle through a demo. And then the description is the text. So that's how you go ahead and use the expander, and that's all there is to it. We could change the direction very easily. So that's kind of the meat of this application as far as how it's laid out. But let's dig into how some of the controls are declared as well. So if we go up here, we have a calendar control. And some of you are probably familiar with the calendar control. This shipped with the SDK. Again, very easy to use. We set a selection mode of single range, so I can actually drag out a range of dates. And then below that, we have an input numeric up-down control. So numeric up-down actually gives us a couple of interesting properties here. One is minimum and maximum. So we'll go ahead and set those. So what this allows me to do is when I click on the calendar, it's going to tell the calendar how many days it should select. So since I add this, the number of days goes up and down. So you see how it selects 27th here and the 31st. And then as I drag out dates, you'll notice that this time usage graph shows at the bottom. We'll get to that in a second. But that's what the numeric up down does. It's super simple. What I've also have here is I also have some searching, and so. You notice here that as I search, I type S, it actually searches the entire calendar. So let's look at how we wire that up. So here at the top, we have an autocomplete. And again, like I mentioned earlier, the autocomplete just takes an item source, so it's going to bind to the same list of appointments that the calendar did. And this is going to walk through this. And this also needs a converter. We talked about converters earlier. Because what's going to happen here is that when it tries to display this data, it needs to know what the string representation of the data is in order to search it. Because if you just give it a list of people, it doesn't know how to do the searching there. So again, we do the same code that we did earlier with the date converter with an appointment converter. It takes an appointment object and returns a string that it wants it to search with. So you notice here now we can type S, and we get a nice template down below. And I'll skip the template because we've done enough of that. And then finally, down here you see that we get we get a chart. Same idea. We're binding the same data again using the chart. And it's right here. So again, the same idea. We have a bar series. It's like column. Bar is horizontal. Column is vertical. So a bar series, we title it. We call it hours used. And we basically have a property called time stats hanging off the object. So that's the property we're going to bind to off of our data context. And then the independent value is label. So label is actually going to be the time. So each object we'll have a time of 10 o'clock or 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock. That's the label. So those are the things we're going to get along the axis, the independent axis, like the x-axis, in the case of a column graph. And the dependent value binding is just the number of those items, so it's count. So to show you what that ends up looking like again, see as I select different things here, I get different values down there at the bottom. And so what you notice is that everything in my application automatically updates. So again, I mentioned this observable collection idea is that as I'm changing these dates, what I'm doing is I'm telling the data source to change its values of its data, and then all the controls automatically kind of just magically get that idea. So works well, usually. All right, styling. So another thing that we heard from developers is that it's too hard to style an application. Not everybody has access to a nice UI designer, and so we thought about how we could make this better for developers. And so one of the things that Silverlight lacks is this idea of implicit styling. And at WPF, you can do styling similar to you do in CSS, where you can say, I want all of my buttons to look like this. Silverlight doesn't currently support that. What you have to do is you can create a button style, but you have to go through your entire application and put on next to every button declaration, my style, my style, my style, my style. It's a little heavyweight, and it makes it very difficult to kind of change things out in a single place. So one of my developers actually wrote this thing called Implicit Style Manager, which is ISM abbreviated there. And what that basically says is that's going to walk the tree and it's going to apply styles to the right components. So that was the first step. And then we basically said, we really want to ship some great looking themes with the control pack, with the Silverlight toolkit. And so we went and hired out some design firms and got a bunch of control themes. And these two things went together really, really well. So you see here that like I can have an application that's the default look on the left before, and I can apply one of our themes to it on the right after, and it just works. And so I'll show you how we get that done. So what we did is for each theme that we ship a DLL that has that theme in it. So we ship the loose XAML if you want to use that. But the way that it typically works is you just take the DLL, you add this one's called Barber Red. You add it to your XML namespace, and then you just wrap your code or your UI that you want to be themed like that in that container, and you're done. That's it. So if you want to change those out, you can change it to a different one, and you're just done. So what we're going to be releasing also soon, and one of the folks on my team is working on this right now, is a set of guidelines of how to take your theme, if you have designers, or you're writing themes of your own, and get it to work with ISM in this way. So we've got a couple folks that have said, hey, we've got great themes we want you guys to give pointers to, and so this is the model we're going to be going down. The other reason that this model works really well is that when Silverlight eventually does, and we're not sure when it's going to happen now, add implicit styling, you'll be able to just like remove these and you're done. You're good to go. So they'll continue to work if you want to use them, or it's very easy for you to move to the kind of model that Silverlight's going to move to, so the compatibility is going to be really good there. So to show you the themes that we have, we've shipped, I think, 6 themes. And we have this thing called the theme browser that's built into this guy here. And so it's going to be tough on this resolution, but there we go. So here's the theme browser. And basically, it's a UI that allows you to go through the same UI with a different theme. So we have 6 themes we've shipped here. We've got 2 flavors that we call Expression, which naturally looks like Expression Blend. There's a progress bar down here. Themes, the way the charts get themed. There's a data grid here. This gets kind of crunched. Let's see if I can resize this a bit. There we go. There's a data grid here. There's a calendar. So that gives you a feel for what the theme looks like. There's a light version of it as well. Little different look and feel there. And then these are 2 new ones that we've added that I really like a lot. One's called Shiny Blue. And it's got this kind of shiny, glossy feel to it. So I really like these scroll bars. I thought turned out really nice. They've got a nice little glow to them. Checkboxes, radio buttons, the whole bit, drop downs. So that's one of them there. And then there's a red version of this as well. So same idea, but with red. And again, we're shipping the XAML. So if you want to make this thing, I don't know, Azure, then you can. We have this orange one that's kind of similar to some of the Office UI. It's kind of this pretty similar to some of this stuff too. And then we've got a purple variant of this as well. So 6 themes we're shipping. We're going to be updating these themes to work with WPF as well. I'm not sure when we'll get that done, but it's kind of being worked on right now. And they'll just work with the way that the WPF implicit styling works. So, Rainier. And then I showed you Barber Red in the slide. Barber Red's coming. It actually needed a little bit more work for some of the components. We've got like 3 or 4 more of these kind of in the pipe. What's that? Right. The question is how do you change them on the fly? So Silverlight does not allow you to set the style of an object more than once. It's once you set it, you're done. This is actually tearing down the whole UI and rebuilding it with the container. So if you want to change your style on the fly, you have to destroy the whole tree and then reconstitute it. So, for example, if you have a user control, what you would do is you just new up a new one, kill the old one, push it in there. So that's how you do it on the fly for now. Can we hold questions for just 2 minutes, please? I'm almost done. So I want to get through one more minute. I'm sorry. So the Barber Red theme that we showed a second ago is coming as well. But this one's called Rainier. I just wanted the idea here is Rainier is a big mountain in Seattle that we can see from pretty much everywhere. That's how that name came from. Barber Red is called. There's also a Barber Green. There's a gal named Karina Barber who's got a blog who did those ones, so we just named them Barber. We couldn't figure out whether jelly or whatever, so we just called it Barber. And then almost out of time here, so I did want to talk about the future. So we're already working on our next release of the toolkit. We've got some bugs that we want to address that didn't get quite into the bucket last week. So we're going to fix any major issues that come along. One of the nice things about our delivery model is that if something slips through that we didn't see, we can actually slipstream out a new release right off the bat. And because users can get to the source code, we can actually just push a fix into the source code tree for somebody that really needs it, right after it happens, and then they can go and pick it up. We're going to be adding new components that didn't make it into the PDC release, accordion. So accordion UI is where it's kind of like a special version of a tab where one thing is visible and you click another one and the other one closes and opens. That's an accordion. And the list view control, those are coming. Charting improvements, I mentioned that we've really been focused on infrastructure. And so we're going to reap the benefits of that. We have some issues working with Blend in VS. Our designer support isn't great for some of the components. We'll be improving that story. And then we'll be integrating the SDK controls will get integrated into the toolkit. So the controls that are currently in the SDK, tab, grid splitter, calendar, date picker, will get moved into the full source model of our toolkit sometime in the near future. So if you want to use all of these controls as one unified chunk, you'll be able to do that. And so this is high-level thinking about the controls we're thinking about doing for Mix 09, which will be kind of our next major release. We'll have a minor release in between an update, like I mentioned, with accordion and list view. But we're looking at a media player control, complete with a template for the play buttons and the pause buttons and stuff like that. We're looking at a time picker control to match with date picker. We're looking at a carousel control, which you've seen this kind of UI on the different music player programs and phones and stuff. A rating control for stars, one to n stars, the different templates that you can use, and then a masked edit text box as well. And then looking farther down the road, things that we're thinking about attacking, in-place editing. We'd like a good in-place editing story, which is like you don't have a bunch of text boxes. You have nice-looking formatted text, and when the user clicks on it or mouses over it, it turns over and there's an edit box or something like that. It gives you a much tighter editing experience that uses less real estate. An appointment calendar, which is the current calendar control is not very set. It's a picker control. It's not very good for displaying data. So the appointment calendar will allow you to actually display date-based data. An image map control, file upload, menu, a slideshow control. So these are some of the things we're thinking. If you have ideas, go up to the CodePlex site. It's codeplex.com/Silverlight. Easy to remember. And we're going to have a wish list bucket there. Just throw them in there. And if you see ones you like, vote for them. And then on the WPF side, since my team is also focused on WPF, our first thing is going to be getting charting and autocomplete box onto WPF. The WPF team is working on a ribbon control, a data grid, and a date picker control. We're going to make sure we align well with them. There is this thing called the WPF toolkit that's also MSPL, codeplex.com/WPF, where you can get these components, so it's kind of a parallel project. We'll get the themes out for WPF, and we're super committed to making sure we deliver value on both sides of the fence there. So please do your evals. Session recordings will be available, and I'll take some questions for anybody that wants to stay later, and thanks for your time.